All right, here we go. October 21st, 2015. It's a date that fans of the Back to the Future trilogy have been waiting for. This is the day, in part 2, remember, that Marty McFly and Doc Brown travel 30 years into the future.
For decades, audiences believed they knew the story behind Back to the Future. A fun time travel adventure built around comedy, friendship, and a flying car. But buried inside old production notes, rejected scripts, and forgotten interviews was a version of the film that looked nothing like the one audiences remember. A version involving darker timelines, disturbing family implications, a nuclear explosion, and scenes so uncomfortable that studio executives reportedly demanded major rewrites before filming could continue. So what exactly was erased from the original version of Back to the Future? And why did the studio want it erased? This is the story of the movie that almost made it to our screens. The script Hollywood kept rejecting. Screenwriter Bob Gale was going through his father's old high school yearbooks one afternoon when a thought crossed his mind. What if you could travel back in time and meet your parents as teenagers? Would you even like them? Would they like you? It was a small, quiet idea. But when Gale shared it with his writing partner Robert Zemeckis, something sparked between them, and they began building a script around it. The problem was that nobody in Hollywood wanted it. Through the early 1980s, Zemeckis and Gale carried their screenplay from studio to studio, collecting rejection after rejection. More than 40 studios reportedly passed on the project. Executives could not figure out what kind of movie it was. It was not raunchy enough to fit alongside the adult comedies that were popular at the time. It was not simple enough to sell as a straightforward family film. Several executives reportedly called it too strange and too difficult to market. Disney looked at the script and walked away for a different reason entirely. The storyline involved a teenage boy traveling back in time and discovering that his own mother had romantic feelings for him. Disney reportedly felt that was simply too uncomfortable for their audience, and they passed. The rejections kept coming. Then something shifted. In 1984, Romancing the Stone became a genuine box office hit, and suddenly Robert Zemeckis was a name studios wanted to work with. Universal Pictures stepped in, and the project that nobody had wanted was finally given a green light. It felt like a victory, but by the time the studio said yes, the screenplay had already changed quite a bit from what Zemeckis and Gale had first imagined. Because the original version of Back to the Future was nothing like the movie audiences would eventually love. It was darker, stranger, and far more unsettling, and most of that version was quietly buried before filming ever began. The darker sci-fi version that almost happened. Most people assume Back to the Future always looked the way it does in the finished film: a silver DeLorean, a flux capacitor, or a clock tower in a rainstorm. But the earliest versions of the script looked nothing like that. In the beginning, the time machine was not a car at all. Early drafts described something closer to a large box-shaped device, almost like a refrigerator. There was no glamour to it, no style. It was cold, clinical, and strange, sitting more comfortably inside a science laboratory than a Hollywood adventure movie. The tone of those early drafts matched the machine perfectly. Where the finished film felt warm and exciting, the original screenplay felt paranoid and heavy. The story leaned deeply into the fears that surrounded everyday life in the early 1980s. Nuclear weapons, Cold War tension, the very real possibility that the world could end at any moment. These were not background details in the original script. They sat right at the center of the story, and nowhere was that clearer than in the original ending. In the version that Zemeckis and Gale first wrote, Marty did not use a lightning bolt to power his journey home. Instead, the climax of the movie reportedly took place in the Nevada desert, where Marty planned to harness the energy of an actual nuclear bomb test to travel back to his own time. A teenage boy, a nuclear explosion, a last desperate attempt to get home before the blast consumed everything around him. It was genuinely terrifying, and it made a strange kind of sense for the era the script was born in, when nuclear anxiety was woven into the fabric of daily life across America. But it was also expensive, dangerous to film, and deeply unsettling in a way that studio executives could not quite get comfortable with, so they pushed back. The nuclear ending was quietly removed, The refrigerator machine was replaced with something more exciting and more visual. The Cold War paranoia was softened until only faint traces of it remained beneath the surface of the finished film. What audiences eventually saw was lighter, faster, and easier to love. But something had been lost in the process. A version of the story that took the darkness of its era seriously and refused to look away from it. The studio had tidied everything up, made it safer and even shinier. What they could not so easily erase, however, was the actor they had already hired to bring Marty McFly to life. The subplot that made executives uneasy. Even after the nuclear ending was removed and the script was made safer, one problem remained. The storyline between Marty and his mother still made people deeply uncomfortable. On the surface, it reads simply enough. Marty travels back to 1955 and accidentally prevents his parents from meeting. To fix things, he has to find a way to bring them together before it is too late. Straightforward enough for a family adventure film, but underneath that simple premise sat something far stranger. Because in 1955, Marty's mother Lorraine is a teenager herself, and she does not know that the boy she has just met is her own son from the future. She only knows that she finds him interesting, attractive even, and the script does not shy away from that. In the finished film, the discomfort is handled carefully. It is played partly for laughs and partly for awkwardness, and audiences generally go along with it because the movie moves quickly enough that there is little time to sit and think too hard about what is actually happening. But earlier drafts of the screenplay apparently pushed that discomfort much further. The emotional tension between Lorraine and Marty was reportedly written with far less humor around it and far more sincerity, which meant that audiences sitting in a cinema would have been asked to watch something that felt genuinely strange and genuinely unsettling, without the safety net of comedy softening the edges. Multiple studios reportedly pointed to this subplot as one of their main concerns. Disney had already walked away partly because of it. Others who read the script felt the same unease without always being able to name exactly why. The filmmakers understood the problem, but they also understood that removing the subplot entirely would destroy the central engine of the story. Without Lorraine's feelings toward Marty, there is no tension. Without the tension, there is no movie. So they made a choice. They kept the storyline but wrapped it carefully in enough humor and warmth to make it feel manageable. They trusted audiences to follow them through the uncomfortable parts without losing faith in what the film was trying to do. And it worked, at least for the better part. But the discomfort never fully disappeared. It simply went quieter. Buried beneath the music and the laughter and the adventure, it sat there in the foundations of the story, doing exactly what it was always meant to do, making audiences feel something they could not quite explain, and all of that emotional complexity might have looked very different if the actor originally hired to play Marty had stayed in the role. The actor who was erased. Before Michael J. Fox ever stepped inside a DeLorean, another actor had already been living inside the role of Marty McFly for weeks. His name was Eric Stoltz. When casting began, the filmmaker's first choice was always Michael J. Fox. He had the energy, the charm, and the likable quality they were looking for. But Fox was locked into his television schedule on the hit sitcom Family Ties, and his commitments there made it impossible to take on a full film production at the same time. So the filmmakers moved to their second choice. Eric Stoltz was a serious, thoughtful actor with genuine talent. He had recently impressed audiences in the film Mask, where he played a teenager living with a severe facial disfigurement with remarkable emotional depth. He was considered a strong choice. Filming began with him in the role, and for several weeks, production moved forward, but something was not sitting right. Crew members began to notice it first. Then, the director noticed it. Stoltz was not playing Marty the way the script needed him to be played. He was approaching the character with the same seriousness and emotional weight he had brought to his previous work. His Marty was darker, quieter, and far more inward. The comedy was not landing. Scenes that were supposed to feel light and fun felt instead like something heavier and colder. The adventure was draining away, and in its place was a performance that felt more like a drama than anything else. The filmmakers faced an almost impossible decision. Weeks of filming had been completed. Millions of dollars had already been spent. Replacing a lead actor at this stage was almost unheard of in Hollywood. They replaced him anyway. Fox's television schedule was renegotiated, and he was brought onto the production while still fulfilling his commitments to family ties. He would film the television show during the day and work on Back to the Future through the night and on weekends. It was an exhausting arrangement, but it worked. The footage shot with Stoltz was buried. The role was reshot almost entirely from scratch, but not entirely. Some of what Stoltz had filmed was harder to remove than the studio perhaps realized. And in at least one corner of the finished movie, traces of the erased actor may still be hiding in plain sight. The footage. The studio could not fully remove. When Eric Stoltz was replaced, the plan was straightforward: reshoot everything. Start fresh, leave no trace behind. But film production is messy, expensive, and complicated, and erasing someone completely from a movie is harder than it sounds. Fragments of Stoltz's footage survived. Over the years, a small number of clips and behind-the-scenes materials have surfaced showing Stoltz as Marty McFly, and the difference in tone is immediately noticeable. Where Michael J. Fox brings brightness and warmth to every scene, Stoltz carries something heavier with him. His Marty looks worried in a way that feels real rather than performed. The humor is absent. The lightness is gone. Watching those clips feels genuinely strange, like looking at a photograph of a road not taken. But the most fascinating detail is not found in the clips that surfaced after production ended. It may be hiding inside the finished film itself. In the diner scene where Marty confronts Biff, there is a moment of physical action that fans have studied closely over the years. A fist swings into frame. A punch connects. And according to some very dedicated observers who have examined the footage carefully, the arm and fist visible in that moment do not appear to match Michael J. Fox's build or jacket sleeve. The suggestion is that what audiences are actually seeing, in one brief moment of the finished and widely released film, is Eric Stoltz's hand delivering the punch that Marty McFly throws at Biff Tannen. It has never been officially confirmed. The studio has never addressed it directly, but it has never been convincingly dismissed either. And it fits a pattern that surrounds the entire production of Back to the Future. A pattern of things being removed, altered, and quietly buried, but never quite disappearing completely. Traces left behind in the edit, shadows of a different movie flickering briefly through the one audiences know and love. Stoltz's performance may have been replaced. His name may have been removed from the credits entirely. But if that fist really is his, then somewhere in the middle of the most famous time travel movie ever made, the erased actor is still there, throwing his one remaining punch. What happened next, however, went far beyond a single erased performance. It became a legal battle that would force Hollywood to ask a question it had never seriously considered before. Who actually owns a human face? The Hollywood lawsuit that changed everything. Crispin Glover was strange, wonderfully, brilliantly strange. As George McFly in the original Back to the Future, he brought something to the role that nobody had quite asked for, but everyone agreed made the film better. His George was awkward and twitchy, and oddly lovable. A man who seemed to exist slightly out of step with the world around him. Audiences responded to it immediately. So when Back to the Future Part 2 entered production, the natural assumption was that Glover would return, but he did not. The exact reasons were never fully agreed upon by everyone involved. Glover himself spoke about salary disputes and creative disagreements. He also reportedly felt uncomfortable with the message he felt the sequel was sending, particularly around themes of wealth and success, and what the story seemed to be saying about the value of money over everything else. Whatever the precise combination of reasons, negotiations broke down, and Glover walked away. The studio had a problem. George McFly was a significant character in the sequel. Removing him entirely was not a practical option. So the filmmakers made a decision that would have consequences nobody fully anticipated at the time. They hired a different actor named Jeffrey Weissman to play the role instead. Then they went further. Using prosthetic makeup and molds that were reportedly based on Crispin Glover's actual facial features, They altered Weissman's appearance to make him resemble Glover as closely as possible. The character moved differently and was shot from specific angles to help maintain the illusion. Audiences watching the sequel were essentially being shown a reconstruction of an actor who had never agreed to appear in the film. When Glover saw what had been done, he sued. The lawsuit that followed was about far more than one actor and one sequel. At its center was a question that Hollywood had never been forced to answer so directly before. Could a studio legally recreate the appearance of a real person without their knowledge or consent? Did an actor's face belong to them, or could it be borrowed, reconstructed, and placed on screen whenever it was convenient? The case was eventually settled, and the Screen Actors Guild introduced new rules specifically designed to prevent the same thing from happening again. It felt resolved and contained, a dispute from another era. But decades later, as artificial intelligence began making it possible to recreate any face with frightening accuracy, the questions Glover had forced Hollywood to confront suddenly felt more urgent and more unsettling than ever before. And on the set of Back to the Future Part 3, a different kind of danger was already waiting. The movie's real-life brush with death. Back to the Future Part 3 took the story to the American Wild West, and for a while, it must have felt like the most straightforward entry in the trilogy to film. Wide-open landscapes, train chases, a simpler era with fewer complicated special effects to manage. But the production carried a darkness with it that had nothing to do with the script. There is a scene in the third film where Marty McFly is hanged. It is framed as a tense moment of danger, the kind of scene adventure movies use regularly to raise the stakes before the hero escapes and everything resolves itself. On screen, it lasts only a short time. Behind the camera, it very nearly ended the entire production in the worst way imaginable. Michael J. Fox performed the scene himself. A rope was rigged around his neck in a way that was designed to look convincing while keeping him completely safe. Stunt coordinators had planned everything carefully. The shot was set up, the cameras rolled, and Fox took the weight of the scene on his own body as professional actors regularly do. Then something went wrong. The rope tightened in a way it was never supposed to. Fox's hand, which was meant to stay between the rope and his neck to protect him, slipped from position. For a brief and horrifying period of time, the pressure on his throat became genuinely dangerous. He lost consciousness. It took a moment for the crew to realize what was happening. By the time they did and cut him free, Fox had been unconscious long enough to frighten everyone present. He recovered, and filming eventually continued, but the incident left a shadow over the production that was never fully discussed in the publicity surrounding the film's release. It was not an isolated moment of danger either. The entire trilogy had been filmed under extraordinary pressure. Schedules were brutally tight. Cast and crew worked hours that left almost no room for rest. Physical demands on the actors were intense and sometimes poorly managed. The cheerful, warm energy of the finished films existed in sharp contrast to the exhausted and sometimes frightened people who had made them. The Back to the Future trilogy asked audiences to believe in a world where everything worked out in the end, where quick thinking and a little courage were always enough to get you home safely. But behind the cameras, the real world kept breaking through, and sometimes the evidence of that chaos was hiding not just in the production itself, but stitched quietly into the finished film for anyone patient enough to look. The hidden imperfections left inside the film. When a movie is made under pressure, cracks appear. Most of the time, studios work hard to smooth those cracks over before anyone sees them. Editors fix problems in the cutting room. Visual effect teams patch over mistakes. Scenes are reordered, trimmed, and quietly corrected until the finished film feels seamless and complete. But Back to the Future was made under such relentless pressure and changed so dramatically during production that some of the cracks slipped through anyway, and the fans noticed. The clock tower flyer that appears at different points in the film changes between scenes. The wording shifts. The details rearrange themselves in ways that are impossible within the logic of the story. It is a small thing, easy to miss on a first viewing, but once seen, it is impossible to unsee. The video camera that Marty uses in 1955 appears to record footage from an angle that his physical position makes completely impossible. The camera would have needed to be somewhere that Marty simply was not standing. The shot exists because it looked good. The logic of how it got there was never resolved. Background extras repeat across scenes that are supposed to take place in entirely different locations and at different times. The same faces reappear in places they could not logically be, visible to anyone who knows where to look. Historical details inside the 1955 sequences contain small errors, moments where the production design captured the feeling of the era without quite capturing the facts of it. The glowing plutonium that powers the flux capacitor behaves in ways that shift and change depending on what the scene requires, with no consistent logic governing how much is needed or what it actually does. None of these things damage the film. If anything, dedicated fans have spent decades treating them almost like a treasure hunt, cataloging each imperfection and debating what it means and how it happened. But taken together, they tell a story of their own. They are the fingerprints of a production that was reinventing itself as it went. A movie that replaced its lead actor, abandoned its original ending, softened its screenplay under studio pressure, and somehow still managed to reach cinemas and become one of the most beloved films ever made. The imperfections are proof that the chaos was real, and they raise a question that is worth sitting with for a moment. If so much was changed, softened, removed, and buried during production, what exactly was the movie that Back to the Future was always meant to be? The version audiences never saw. Imagine a different cinema, a different night, and different film flickering on the screen. No DeLorean gleaming under the lights. No clock tower lightning strike sending the audience cheering in their seats. No cheerful rock and roll ending with Marty playing guitar and everything falling perfectly into place. Instead, imagine something quieter, something colder. A story about a boy standing in a Nevada desert, watching a nuclear explosion rise into the sky, using the most terrifying force on Earth just to find his way back home. That version of Back to the Future almost existed. Buried beneath the finished film that the world fell in love with is the outline of something quite different. A darker screenplay written in the shadow of Cold War anxiety, where the humor was thinner and the danger felt genuinely real. A story that took its science fiction seriously in a way the final film never quite allowed itself to do. Eric Stoltz almost brought that version to life. His performance, from everything that has survived and everything that crew members described at the time, matched the tone of those early drafts far more closely than Michael J. Fox's eventual portrayal. Stoltz played Marty as someone genuinely frightened, genuinely lost, carrying a weight that the cheerful adventure around him could not quite support. It was a real performance inside the wrong movie. Or perhaps it was the right performance inside the original movie, before that movie was changed into something else. The uncomfortable subplot between Marty and his mother existed in those early drafts without the protective layer of comedy that the finished film wrapped around it. The discomfort was meant to be felt. Audiences were supposed to sit with it rather than laugh their way past it. The lawsuits, the accidents, the erased actor, the buried footage, the continuity errors scattered through the finished film like tiny fault lines, all of it points back to the same truth. Back to the Future was not always what it became. It was pulled in different directions by writers, studios, actors, and circumstances, and each time it was pulled, something from the original vision was left behind. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently, sometimes in ways that left visible marks on the finished product that no amount of editing could completely erase. What remains is a film that carries two identities at once. The warm, funny, endlessly rewatchable adventure that audiences have loved for decades. And underneath it, like a photograph developing in reverse, the outline of a stranger, darker, more unsettling story that never quite made it to the screen. The version audiences never saw is still there if you know how to look. In the tonal heaviness of a surviving Stoltz clip. In a fist that may not belong to the actor credited with throwing it. In a clock tower flyer that cannot make up its mind what it says. The erased version left its fingerprints everywhere, and the reason it was erased, when you finally understand it, says something quietly profound about why stories matter and what we need them to do for us. Why the studio changed everything. There is a simple answer to why the studio changed Back to the Future: money. Studios make decisions based on what they believe audiences will pay to see. And in the mid-1980s, a paranoid Cold War science fiction film with a deeply uncomfortable emotional subplot and a nuclear explosion for a climax was not something executives felt confident selling to a mainstream audience. So they softened it, simplified it, and wrapped it in warmth and music and humor until it felt safe enough to release. That is the simple answer, but there is another answer sitting quietly underneath it, and this one feels more true. The studio changed Back to the Future because the darker version, for all its ambition, was missing something essential. Something that the writers and directors may not have fully realized they needed until the pressure of production forced them to find it. That thing was hope. The original screenplay was a product of its time in the most literal sense. The early 1980s were heavy with fear. Nuclear war felt genuinely possible. The Cold War cast a shadow over daily life that is difficult to fully appreciate from the distance of several decades. Writing a time travel story in that atmosphere meant writing through that fear, and the earliest drafts of the script absorbed it completely. But fear, on its own, does not make people fall in love with a story. What made Back to the Future timeless was not the time machine, or the special effects, or even the comedy. It was the idea, at the very center of the story, the idea that the past is not fixed, that the mistakes made by the people who came before you are not permanent, that you can go back and change things, repair things, give people a second chance at the lives they deserved. That is an extraordinarily powerful thing to believe. It is the reason a teenager watching the film for the first time feels something loosen in their chest and eyes during the ending. It is the reason adults who grew up with the movie return to it again and again, not just for nostalgia, but for the feeling it reliably produces. The feeling that things can get better, that the future is not written yet. The studio did not erase the darker version of Back to the Future out of cowardice or cynicism, even if some of their decisions along the way were driven by exactly those things. They erased it because the story kept insisting on becoming something warmer, something more generous, something that wanted to send audiences back out into the world feeling lighter than when they arrived. The nuclear ending could never have done that. Stoltz's heavier performance could never have done that. Only this version could, and so the darker timeline was quietly closed, the way all the best time travel stories eventually close their paradoxes, with the gentlest possible suggestion that some versions of events are simply better left unrealized. The story found the ending it needed, and so did we. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.